Hello and welcome to this After Effects tutorial. In this tutorial, I want to get you started with masks. As you know, masks hide part of an image. So let's get us started. In After Effects, I'm going to create a new composition, which is Control or Command N. I'll leave all of the defaults and I'll just name it masks. Notice that this is 1920 by 1080, and we're going at a frame rate of 29.97 frames per second. Click OK, and there it is. I would like to create a solid, so Control or Command Y, and the color green is fine, and there you go. Now, with the layer selected, select one of these masking tools. I'm just going to select the rectangle tool, and I'll click and drag. This is a mask. You notice that even the display here in the timeline tells you that you have masks and that the name of the mask is called Mask 1. All right, I'm going to undo that and deselect the layer. If I click and drag now, notice that I don't have a mask. What I have is a shape layer. So the same tools that create masks create shape layers. All you have to do is make sure that the layer is selected when you draw using that tool, and then you're sure to create a mask. All right, so let's select the layer, and now let's create a different mask. Let's do a rounded rectangle. If I click and drag, there it is. Now, my mouse button is still down. I'm going to use the left arrow and the right arrow. See the difference? If I use the up arrow or the down arrow, nothing happens here, but left and right do make a difference. All right, I'm going to go ahead and delete that mask. Just click on its name and press the delete key. Now, I'm going to use the ellipse tool, and there it is. If I use the up or down arrows or the left or right arrows, nothing happens. But if I press and hold the shift key, I'm constraining this to be a perfect circle. And by the way, it's the same with the rectangle tool. If I click and drag, and while my mouse button is still down, I press and hold the shift key, that would be a perfect square. If I select the polygon tool and I click and drag, up arrow gives me more segments, down arrow gives me less. Right arrow gives me roundness going that way. Left arrow gives me roundness, but going the other way. See the difference? The trick here is to leave the mouse button down as you draw these masks. Now, one more thing that I haven't said anything about is this. If I click and drag on a mask and then I find that the mask is not in the right place, I can press and hold the space bar and then move the mask. But that only works if my mouse button is down. All right, so here we go. That's without pressing and holding the space bar. This is pressing and holding the space bar. I can just move my mask to wherever I need to. All right, finally, let's go to the star tool and let's click and drag to create a star. Up arrow gives me more rays, down arrow gives me less, and this is more like a flower. But if I use the left and the right arrows, I make these roundy. And if I use the control key, I can make the rays shorter and or longer. So all I'm doing is toggling, pressing and holding the control or command key. So this is with the command key selected. This is without, so it makes it smaller. This is with, so if I make it smaller, all I'm doing is making the rays shorter. So up and down arrows gives me more or less rays. Right and left arrows gives me roundness of these rays. Now, one thing that I haven't mentioned is this. What if I want to reset the start to what it was? Double click it. There you go. That resets that. The same with the other ones. So the polygon tool, double click it. The rounded rectangle tool, double click it. And that actually resets these masks to what they were by default. I'm going to delete these two masks again. And now let's just talk about the mask transparency. If I click and drag, obviously anything inside of the mask is visible, everything outside of the mask is invisible. And this is actually alpha channel, so I'm going to switch to the checkerboard pattern so you can see it a little bit better. And now you can expand the mask in the timeline and notice that you have several options in here. You have a mask feather. This one is kind of self-explanatory, so it feathers the mask, half on the inside of the mask, half on the outside of the mask, just for a smooth transition between what is visible and invisible, and is measured in pixels. The mask opacity is self-explanatory, and the mask expansion is also self-explanatory. I'm going to reset all three of these simply by selecting them, right-clicking them, and clicking Reset, and there it is. Now, let's talk about this drop-down menu. Right now, and the default is to add, but look, it could be none. And then, the mask is producing zero transparency. You could use this for, say, a stroke effect or anything like that. Add, we already have it. You could invert it. You could definitely invert it, but that's the same as subtract. So what is inside of the mask would now be invisible, as opposed to what is outside will be visible. Intersect only works with more than one mask. Look what happens when both of them are set to intersect. The opaque part of it only stays where the two masks overlap. You could change both of these to lighten, and then it's like it's doing nothing. They're like both set to add. But look what happens when I change the opacity of one of these masks. See how this one is now semi-transparent? Where they overlap is actually taking the transparency of the more opaque or solid of the two masks. If I change these to darken, do you see how it's like intersect, but it's taking the opacity of the less opaque or more transparent of the two masks. And finally, we have difference. And I'm going to change this opacity to 100%. And where they intersect is now transparent. So these kind of blending modes and transparency settings for the masks are very similar to what you will find in Illustrator and Photoshop. And if you copy and paste masks from Illustrator, they will always paste with difference mode, which is what we have in right now. And of course, you can always invert these, but notice that if you invert both, you're not doing anything. You would have to invert only one. And this brings us to the end of this tutorial about getting you started with masks. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you on the next tutorial.